Welcome to this episode of Navigating the Fog of Change. I'm Tom Dorley of Sage Partners. I'll be your host today. For the last year, we've been laying the foundation, the predicate, for why we're in a period of turbulence that is almost unprecedented. It's massive, it's rapid, and it's going to last forever. And we're going to need new tools to deal with the change that are happening. We've used the tagline, Navigating the Fog of Change, to talk about how it is we need to go after this change in different ways. So we've laid down that predicate. Let me bring in the Harvard Business Review, who confirms what we're having to say. In a recent article, Harvard Business Review said the following: leaders are managing ungovernable change. We agree with that. At a time when their employees are increasingly skeptical of their efforts. 79% of 2,900 people interviewed by Gartner say their organization has made poor change decisions in the past, and more than half believe they're unprepared to do it in the future. That's troublesome. That's why it is we've put together as Sage Partners this program about how it is we help you deal with this whole concept of turbulence, of change. As a way of doing that, I've invited three of my Sage Partners to talk about different areas of the journey to navigate the fog of change. I have Larry Bennigson with me. Larry comes from the Harvard Business School, where he was one of the leaders of the custom education program. In addition, he brings an idea called the Leaders Change Agenda from his work at the Mac Group. John Hansen has spent his time at the intersection of strategy and implementation, figuring out how to make things work. John's going to talk about the importance of making sure that your organization, your enterprise, is ready for change. If they're not ready, it's actually not going to happen. I'll come back and talk about how it is we get feedback from the world, external, internal, to bring us understanding of all what these changes are about. I'm going to introduce a couple of new ideas. And then finally, Bob Kueppers is going to talk about often an under-leveraged activity, an under-leveraged asset, your board of directors, and how to bring the board in. So as I said, we've laid the predicate. These are turbulent times. We need to find new ways of going forward, new ways of making change. So let's go together and outline how to do it. As a caveat, today we're going to go through 4 areas, and we'll go through them quickly to set things up so you get an idea of what to do. In subsequent episodes, we'll come back and dig into these areas in more detail. Today is perhaps a preview of coming attractions, but as a way of saying, listen, in spite of the fact that we're an enormous amount of change, we can do this. And here are some areas of expertise that we're going to share with you. So I'm going to start with Larry Bennigson. Larry's going to talk to us about how you bring a concept called the Leaders Change Agenda into the organization to help it have focus as a starting point. Larry, tell us about the Leaders Change Agenda, what it is, and how it works.
Tom, thank you. You've made the case that in the old days, the approach of what I'll call one and done strategic planning doesn't fit in a constantly changing competitive environment. So how do leaders of any enterprise change from one and done to continuous assessment of evolving opportunities and risks? The Leaders Change Agenda is a 6-part roadmap for making these kinds of changes. First, the agenda starts at the top, the leader making clear the why, the what, and the how of change. Second, it has to be anchored, literally owned by the leadership team. They carry leadership forward, supporting necessary messages and actions. Third, it has to broadly recognize and address the cultural, the process, the people, and the structural requirements for the future. Fourth, it has to follow a game plan of milestones, actions, and cascades through the organization. Fifth, it has to monitor progress, identify lessons learned, course correct. And finally, sixth, of course, it has to celebrate, reinforce, and reward progress. This 6-step roadmap sounds simple, but it's not in practice. In a future podcast, we'll identify some of the surprising shortfalls and challenges in implementing the Leaders Change Agenda.
Thank you, Larry. That gives us a good starting point. Next, John, let's talk about this issue of making sure the organization is ready for change. Organization is not ready, it's not going to work. No farmer would throw seeds on an acre of ground and expect crops to pop up. Has to prepare the soil, get everything ready. Talk, John, about how it is the enterprise can make sure that the organization is ready for change and is aligned with the effort.
Thanks for the introduction, Tom, and for the context setting. Larry just talked about the leader's change agenda, and as the name implies, that means that organizations and their employees need to do things differently in the future. All of us at Sage have helped companies change strategically and operationally. And if there's anything we've learned about what companies need to do to be successful in changing is, to paraphrase Bill Clinton, it's the people, stupid. And that's true whether we're talking about employees, teams, or the enterprise as a whole. Tom, you mentioned the HBR article, which said that 79% of people surveyed didn't believe their company could change successfully or effectively. And that's a problem. So how do we change that perception, and how do companies navigate the fog of change more successfully? Well, we at Sage believe they have to ask themselves some fundamental questions about change. For example, has executive management communicated and made the case for change? So why change, and why change now? Do employees understand the change strategically, operationally, in terms of culture and mindset, for example, both for themselves and for the organization as a whole? And are they willing and able to make the change? And then what lessons can companies learn from change from the past, what I call the ghosts of change past? That is, how do they apply lessons learned to be more successful going forward? And ultimately, do employees believe their company can change successfully? So we believe that a key to being ready for change is to conduct an assessment of the organization's readiness for change, to address the questions that I've just talked about. And once that assessment is done, then companies can come up with plans to be able to address risks and concerns, and ultimately to be able to change more successfully in the future. So I look forward to discussing change and change readiness and change management in a future conversation, Tom.
Thank you, John. So these two activities, developing the leader's change agenda and assessing the readiness, happen in parallel. As we do that, we need some way to say that if we're going to recognize that things are changing, how do we bring in information? How do we bring in the understanding of what it means for us, our customers, our competitors, our employees? We need to create, we believe, two new capabilities that sense what's happening out in the world. Now, you might say, don't we want everybody to raise their hand and say, hey, I've got an idea, and bring it in? Of course. But in terms of focusing, in terms of getting a effort that sort of really digs into it, we think we need to have teams that are aimed at what we call gathering information and sorting the information. Now, these people come from all levels in the organization, not just the senior people, but the young people who have sort of new ideas. They come from everywhere in the organization, sales and marketing and the manufacturing floor and technology and R&D. These are the people who are at the front lines, sort of feeling and understanding what's going on. So we create one team, which we call lookouts. What are lookouts to do? They're to go out and bring in these leading indicators, to find these signals and bring them back. We want another group, which we call scouts. And the scouts are about sorting the potatoes, figuring out whether this really works, and if it's going to work, how do we employ it? Or if it doesn't work, setting it aside. Lookouts and scouts are new capabilities that bring focus to the idea of saying we need to understand what is happening in our world and bringing it forward. With that as a basis, we now turn to the fact that where do we get this information in addition to from inside the organization? Well, we believe in our experience, and we've worked and served on boards for a long time, that the board is an underleveraged asset. Bob, talk about how you can bring the board into the game, into the mix, and use their expertise and their experience to shape the leader's change agenda and to help us navigate the fog of change.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. It's fundamental that fog of change and all of its elements and impacts will have a potentially consequential impact on the company. And of course, the board in its oversight role is watching and advising on all issues of importance such as this. The oversight role is fundamental, but what's really great to have from your board is get some insights to help you not only plan, but execute successfully in a way that the board is completely comfortable with. So one of the best ways to do that in the context of the fog of change is a really common sense approach to engaging the board on this issue. And I think of it as a simple two-step process. First, the CEO, I would suggest, I'm sure has great relationships with many of the board members, but should approach a board member that he has particularly good trust and confidence with and seek advice from that director as to a process to bring the board in, to have that conversation and to get insights from the board as a valuable asset. Second, the way you do that, in my opinion, would be to have an executive session with the board and members of senior management where that conversation could occur, shrink the room a little bit. Board meetings can be massive events with all kinds of management people, all kinds of others. But if you get in an executive session with the board, the likelihood of minutes kind of goes away. Candor can rise to the top of the conversation. And I think that you then can conclude, you have, number one, an understanding as to the cadence and content of the future board briefings and how this is going to play out over time as management brings this to the board, at a repeated basis as needed. And secondly, what are the expectations of management that the board has to negotiate, to navigate through this fog of change? And now that they're inside the tent, if you will, and working with management, we certainly hope that the kind of value the board can bring manifests itself in future conversations with management and ultimately execution of the plan to manage through the fog of change. That's certainly one way to do it. I guess every board's unique, but I think that a very candid and open conversation led by management with full participation of the board is going to pay dividends in the long run.
Thank you, Bob. And I really like this idea of we want our board to have insight, not just oversight. Oversight's important, but insight is where we need help. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, John. Thank you, Larry. What we tried to do today is to present a highlight, sort of an overview of how it is, in spite of the trauma, in spite of the turbulence that we're all facing, it is possible to navigate successfully the fog of change. As an enterprise, we have two options, at least. One option is to say, well, there's so much going on. What can we do? It's like a tsunami. We're going to try to wait it out and see what happens. You can't do that. Not now. You do that, you're going to be left behind. Somebody else is going to gain the ground that you could have gained. Rather, you need to seek this as a time of great opportunity. Anytime there's change, market share is up for grabs. New customers can be had. New ways of dealing with those customers are open to us all. We need to see this as an opportunity to fundamentally change who it is we are. As we navigate the fog of change, we need to understand we're all after the same objectives. We want to build organizations that are more resilient, more creative, and more valuable than ever before. Stay with us as we continue this discussion in future episodes and bring depth to the conversation we've had today. It is possible to navigate the fog of change. Let's do it. Take care and be well.